And we're live with another
Nice.
episode of, I think we're calling it subscription radio. We went from, I think it started off as nuts and bolts of subscriptions, and then we pivoted to subscription radio. And
Makes it
on
more
me
casual. It's fun.
makes it a little bit more casual. I think today I have a special guest with me, Ben Kochavy. Kochavy.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Say founder and founder of ColdBru Digital Agency, growth agency, based in sunny California. Works with a bunch of D2C brands. Is a one of the smartest guys that I know in the game. So really excited to have Ben on here because he'll be speaking from sort of the perspective of the brand as an operator as well as a growth marketer. And Ben, I mean, let's tell all of our listeners and my mom exactly what you do. Be like, explain it like I'm five.
Awesome. What do? I take D2C brands that probably in many cases don't even call themselves D2C yet, or just the e-com brand that someone starts because they like a product, wanted to solve a problem, and solve growth for them. Usually they don't really have marketing talent in-house. They're not exactly skilled in that place. And so just kind of teach them frameworks, actually execute on frameworks for them on how to operate like some of the bigger brands do. That tends to add a lot of value and help them get to the point where they can raise funding, et cetera, to actually build the team in-house in the future. But yeah,
Got it.
it's usually
And so
fun
is it
stuff,
just
paid media
is it just
across.
you? Is it do you have a team?
Me
How long have
and
you
a
been doing
small team.
this?
Been doing growth 7 years. This in the agency 3 years. Team of 4.5 people now, but we'll probably be closer to 7 or 8 by the end of the month. At least that's the goal.
I'd like to see what that half person looks like, I think.
Just half time, but yeah, half person full bench.
Just imagining an arm somewhere, and I'll be
Yeah,
like pleading the fifth. Oh no, it came out on subscription radio.
yeah, that would be bad. I
No.
literally live 2 blocks from a police station, so that would be really bad.
Yeah. Um, okay, cool. Yeah, so yeah, tell us a little bit about. You mentioned that a lot of these brands wouldn't consider themselves typical direct to consumer brands. Like, what does that mean, and what are the types of products that the brands that you work with sell, and is there a certain type of profile in a brand that um, that'd be helpful for us to know for context?
Yeah. So I guess most of the time, I say the majority of the work is between Series A and Series B, but then there's a portion of the work which is like before they're either bootstrapped or not raising money, and they have a product, a brand, and a website, and they're trying to sell it. Usually the founder, who's usually not done much in growth or marketing and just figured out the product stuff, trying to turn it into something that's actually operating. They've probably hired some contractors, et cetera. It didn't really work out. And then they kind of work with us and we full stack solve it. That's kind of the whole sales pitch is like we solve growth. So whatever is needed, we make it happen. Um, what that means in terms of context is that there's usually, we're not a member or like a resource to the marketing team. We are the marketing team. It changes the dynamics. We're like talking with the founders about offer and profit and margin and how to optimize for margin across the whole business versus looking at, oh, we're the paid media agency. This is the CPA we're going to hit and like generating that as much as we can, which there's definitely a time and place for that. But when they're earlier stage, that more business level advice outside of just the marketing CPA, KPIs, et cetera, is really valuable. And at least to the clients we work with. In terms of like the types of things they're selling, everything from Lancets for people who have diabetes to D2C health brands, right? We worked with a brand that was providing CGMs at scale to people who had type 1 diabetes and really like escalating their quality of care to
What's
working
a CGM?
continuous glucose monitors. It's a little patch you wear
Oh
to
yeah.
measure
Okay.
blood sugar, but like it's actually a medical device. A lot of people use it like
Huh.
sort of biohacking style, but it originally came out as a medical device for people who have diabetes. And so the actual use case was never really done well until this company came along and actually applied technology and scale and just the typical cloud structure you expect from modern brands, to the medical problem of treating type 1 diabetes with not just insulin, but like lifestyle changes, etc. So that was pretty interesting. And then worked with mattress brands, Resident Home, and their family of brands for quite a while as well. And those are probably way past Series A, but just a great experience to work with brands like that. And there they actually had the marketing resources, so you fit in very differently. Just adding value on specific projects versus going in and like owning the whole full stack from a marketing perspective.
Got it. And so it sounds like, at what stage is it too early for you to work with a brand? Because it sounds like, and I've heard this in speaking and even trying to hire marketers and even copywriters myself, like early stage in products, I have several times heard, I can't help you until you have reached, we'll call it product market fit. I've heard variations of that where, the challenge is that early on, the founder, whomever, has sales problems. Oftentimes the assumption is, I'm trying to find my audience and I'm trying to test the value proposition and the positioning, the messaging, which benefits to mention. Most of the marketers I've spoken with, a lot of them don't want to get involved at that stage. Is that is that true for you? It sounds like you are already working with people who are making money. You're helping them make more money. You're not going from 0 to 1. You're going from 1 to a bajillion.
Yeah, a little bit. I guess it's interesting. I did a stint as a head of growth for a pseudo incubator out of Miami back in the day. And so I did a lot of that 0 to 1 thinking with founders. It was a lot of just helping them do exactly what you're describing. The problem is, what the typical stat is, 9 out of 10 startups will fail. Well, they typically fail at that very early stage, like a big portion of them. So what ends up happening is making it worth the while of someone who's had a lot of experience and has a lot of opportunities. Kind of hard for those founders who don't have cash and don't have product market fit. It's not a justifiable investment on their part, and it's not a justifiable investment on my part from a time perspective, just because fuel to a fire that's actually working is much better than like fuel on sand, for lack of a better metaphor. That's why like most marketers end up in this like little niche, because anywhere else and you're kind of setting yourself up for a failure, right? You have 10 clients and 9 of them will fail. That's not long-term clients, unfortunately. I wish they all succeeded, but
That's interesting. And so, okay, so have you worked with any companies selling coffee? Any cold brew companies?
No. Well, I did like a stint. I gave some advice to the coffee. I didn't actually work. I gave some advice to the coffee shop I used to go to every day many years ago, but that was about it. It was like, just do these 3 things for 5 minutes and then I moved on. But no, never actually worked for coffee. I just drink a lot of it.
Got it. It's funny.
Yeah.
I feel like the name's gonna come up a few more times. I can't help a good pun.
No, I had literally, I think it was a day to come up with a name for an agency, just because I was like creating a business entity and I needed the business entity more than I needed the name. Yeah. And so I had to come up with something, and I was drinking a lot of coffee at the time, specifically cold brew. So there you have it.
That's funny. I had a similar situation where I had to choose a name for an LLC, and I came up with Skinny and Bald, because I was kind of skinny, kind of bald. It's interesting how you and I go, how we came from different directions, and our urgency resulted in very different names.
Yeah, totally.
And mine was staring me in the face.
I guess mine was too. I was drinking cold brew when I came up with it.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so let's talk about, I guess one other question. Part of what Joel and I have been talking about a lot of is around replenishment and brands that require replenishment. You talk about, so you referred to some of your brands that you've worked with, so around the glucose monitor, the mattress companies. Those aren't replenishable products. Have you worked with many or any replenishable products? Like, what are the typical types? Are you typically working with these one-off purchase products? Are you working with subscription brands? Like, how have you seen that market like evolve in the last few years? Are you a consumer of them too?
I'm a pretty big consumer of D2C, but I guess not subscription. I'm very experimental. So what I do is I subscribe and cancel to like everything just to kind of see their
Get
experience and learn.
20% off. Oh.
Get 20% off, but mostly just like get like their experience down, right? I get inspired by experiences, so I like to see different ones from different places. I do that a lot. In terms of subscriptions I've worked with, so probably the biggest names in subscriptions that I've worked with were Brightside, which is like D2C health subscription. It's not like
Huh.
I guess they're sending you prescription meds in the mail every month, basically replenishing an actual prescription. But it's mostly the care model that's the big deal over there. Same thing with Steady. That is actually a subscription. Those devices need to be replaced every 14 days. Those continuous
Oh.
glucose monitors. So they're like a Band-Aid. You put them on, 14 days later you take it off and put a new one on. So you do need to replenish that on a 2-week cycle to keep it tracking. And then on the other side, definitely mattress brands are not subscription. People don't subscribe to mattresses, but working with a brand that sells Lancets, which is also for diabetics, just by accident, like I ended up working with 2 companies that serve people who have diabetes. But that's I'm always glad to help. Like it's very rewarding to work with brands like that. And then on the other side, there's a curated subscription, basically fashion brand selling to men, curated products once a month, once every 2 months, sort of like as needed. It's not a consumable,
Mhm.
but they are basically adapting to like the subscription model, but to men's fashion, which typically does not fit into subscription the way you would look at it normally.
Unless it's organic and it like falls apart after 30
Right.
days. That
Yeah.
would be an interesting eco-friendly made out of like seaweed pants or something.
I feel like wouldn't that be bad with water? Like it rains and like your clothing falls apart.
It'd be an interesting party favor or segue into into something. Um, okay, interesting.
Yeah. I think you were asking earlier how much I'm seeing subscription, like people go to subscription, and what comes to mind is like subscription is a convenience factor in many cases. People do subscription for convenience, but then what I also see in terms of like people don't talk a lot about this a lot, at least that I've seen, is that it's harder to convince someone to sign up for subscription in many cases. People have this like built-in wariness of like one more bill every month, and so uh, subscriptions have higher LTV, right? There's plenty of like studies that have pulled that out, and I don't really doubt that. But on the other side of it, I think they also have higher acquisition costs in many cases, right? If you're
Hmm.
doing apples to apples and something doesn't like require a subscription, but you're trying to turn it into a subscription,
Hmm.
uh, I what I've seen and I've heard from colleagues similar stories is that CPAs tend to go up for the same product on subscription versus consumption, just because people the given the price not moving too much on a subscription, right? It's like 10-15% discount, not 50% off.
Hmm.
People will be hesitant to sign up for something with a subscription, but they'll try it once. So
Hmm.
it's kind of this trade-off you're playing from a financial perspective of LTV, increasing LTV by going to subscription, but then the trade-off is usually your CPA goes up. Now this is like channel dependent. What's your like? Are you doing it all organic? It changes everything versus if you're paying for your traffic. But if you're paying for your traffic, it's just the calculus equation you got to run on. Like, at what point do you want to spend on the CPA for the lifetime value? Because then you have cash flow in the middle, right? What's your payback period? Your payback
Hmm.
period is actually most likely going to be longer on the subscription, but your total revenue from that user will probably be higher. So it's trade-offs. There's no like one right answer there. It's just an interesting dynamic because I think if you look at it in parts, you see different things. But if you look at the full stack, it's not. There's no clear answer either way. But it's a conditional decision that I have to deal with somewhat often, right? Like, why not do a bundle of 6 versus a subscription for lifetime, a subscription
Hmm.
monthly, but like in perpetuity? And that question becomes churn and all these other things. But then cash flow is actually a lot easier if you're doing upfront bundling. You get all the cash upfront. You do 6 months of
Hmm.
will be delivered in one year. Shipping is cheaper usually, and you get the cash upfront, which cash is actually a big thing people aren't solving for. They're solving for LTV, but not like immediate cash in many cases.
Right, and at least in the B2B SaaS world, prepaid annual subscriptions are big. And I think what you're describing works for, we'll call it shelf stable products, but wouldn't work
Right.
for consumables. You can still do prepaid, but maybe you're prepaying for 6 months or a year of apples.
Right. No, I
Um,
totally agree. And it
yeah.
has to be shelf stable for that model to apply directly.
No, but that's
Uh,
really
yeah.
interesting, especially around the shipping costs. I think what I wonder is, so for example, I live in New York City in a relatively small apartment, 900 square feet. Um, I don't have a lot of, I actually buy smaller things of like everything, in part because I don't have a lot of shelf space. And so I intentionally will not buy in bulk. So I have a bit of the, it's not that I don't want to buy like 2 or 3 of something, but I don't want to have 24 paper towels, because I just don't have the space. And so it's interesting how lifestyle and how maybe where geography could affect. Like if you have a house and a garage, then and selling like buying a year in advance presumably makes sense. But don't you have this? Don't you then still have the same issue or challenge though around the person still needs or wants to trial, so you still have that initial, call it customer acquisition cost of the first product, and then it's upselling them eventually to buy 6, as you described.
Um, you do, it kind of depends on what you're selling, right? For example, the question becomes, let's say you've tried the product, you did a one-off purchase. Let's look at toothpaste as an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shelf stable, but consumable. One-off purchase, you buy one because you want to see if you even like the toothpaste. You like the toothpaste, now you have a buying decision, probably because someone hit you with an email trying to sell you on something. It's either a subscription, hey, subscribe now, get exclusive discount or repeat discount, whatever, or buy a pack of 6, get 30% off, but get 6 and put them in your closet.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, in my life, like day to day, I've done that, like the pack of 6 for the things I like, because I don't want to worry about it. And I also know
Yeah.
that I get really irritated when I get 3 of the same thing and I only consuming 1 a month. So I have 2 extra sitting there without the conscious decision to, right? It's supposed to be convenient, but it's actually usually, I mean, you can execute this well, but it's rarely executed well in the sense that you're always getting it just in time because shipping gets lost. So you actually have to put it in a little bit early, but how consistent is shipping? How easy is it to ship, etc. So there's all these dynamics you're dealing with, but it's different, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
exact opposite from you. I don't mind having 6 things of paper towels in my closet and toothpaste and like every other consumable that's shelf stable. So I never have to worry about it. And when the last bottle goes out, which will last me however long, I just make the order on Amazon these days or via
Right.
email, one click on whatever app I'm using for
Yeah.
the given product.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, 'cause I also imagine this ties into inventory issues for the brands on the back end too, where like supply chain predictions around the seasonality. And I've been hearing more and more that's a whole nother world. But like a good friend of mine, 80, who you and I've talked about, he's
Yeah.
working on Cogsy, which is his whole thing is around helping with cash flow decisions around inventory. That would be my ignorant way of describing what he does. At least I didn't describe it as he's a farmer in like, you know, South Africa. I understand better than that what he's doing, but
Sure.
when it comes to the we'll call it the supply chain stuff, I don't really know all that much. But that's interesting because again, I would imagine pre-buying in bulk. Yeah, I wonder how profitable that is from a margin or a contribution margin perspective versus someone buying or subscribing and getting 6 renewals. I think the difference there, though, just to not the devil's advocate, that's not even the point, is if someone buys and replenishes 6 times, that's 5 more opportunities after the first purchase to upsell them on something else. So, like to increase their average order value, either through promotional offers or complimentary offers.
What you said was interesting is that the one click upsell or like any sort of upsell, 6 upsell opportunities for 6 doesn't account for churn, doesn't account for cash flow.
Yeah.
and assumes there is something to upsell. Now, you're
Yeah.
right that the 6 upsell opportunities are valuable, but how much more valuable are they than just an email upselling without the like purchase decision, right? You're shipping
Yeah.
them something, so you're sending them an email, hey, it's on the way. Would you like it to add anything to your box or whatever? But then on
Yeah.
the opposite side of it, you could just send, hey, would you like this other thing and upsell them via email? What's like the incremental added value there
Yeah.
versus the cash flow up front of having 6 months worth of product sales cash
Yeah.
day one. It's a trade-off, and it purely depends on like your product mix and like 1,000 other dynamics. There's no like solution to that, but it's what kills a lot of e-commerce brands is cash flow. It's not LTV or margin or CPA. It's the fact that the cash flow doesn't work for those things.
Interesting.
I don't know. There's no solution. This is like I spend all day worrying about this stuff, and it's like a different solution for each client, and it's purely dependent on their situation. And there's no crazy like formula I can apply. At least I'm not smart enough to create that formula yet.
Well, so in your mind, what's the ideal? Do you have a sense of what the ideal solution is for someone like you, and how many yous are there? And would you define what your behavior is as a certain profile or type of consumer? No.
I can mute.
Sorry, I'm sort of talking. Yeah. Is that the fire alarm?
Yep.
That's awesome. We
That's great.
knew this was a possibility. We've been audio bombed by
the fire department marshal.
the fire department. At least you know it works.
But yeah, we're back.
Awesome. Okay.
Where were we?
We were talking about basically the challenges around like buying in bulk versus in the trade-offs of a subscription and the opportunities for upsells and sort of all of the different variables that go into actually you said that one of the primary reasons e-commerce businesses fail is cash flow issues. I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
I think so. Going back to subscriptions, or at least putting kind of like call it a bookend on it, I'm curious because it sounds like most of you yourself aren't a fan of subscriptions. You are in a segment of people who would buy in bulk. I'm curious. So does that mean that when you buy in a store, you would just change the quantity to 6, or do you intentionally like? What if a store doesn't have a a bulk order, right? Like a bundle of 6. Would you just buy a quantity of 6, or would that be like do you look like would you still buy a like quantity of 6, or would you buy bulk of 6?
It depends on the product, because there are like I don't want to like straight up like be deceiving. Like I take supplements a lot, for example, and I think I have 3 or 4 of them that I get every month, and I usually have an extra bottle of the supplement just sitting there because the subscription mechanics weren't good, but I don't mind. I'll just like burn through it. On the other side, I have like other stuff that I just buy in the same category, just supplements, and I'll buy like a supply for 6 months, because essentially you get a bigger bottle in that case.
Yeah.
Instead of like getting 6 bottles, you get a bigger bottle. So in lots of cases, just getting the bigger thing that lasts longer. And in other cases, if it's specifically offered to me, then I'll take a bundle for a discount. But otherwise, I'll do a subscription until it becomes annoying and like I cancel it and move to buying itself, which I just did for like 2 of them just because they were sending me way more than I needed. Like there was a skincare thing, and essentially I was consuming it at half the rate that they were sending it to me, and they didn't have a great way to solve for that.
Because you have a small
Which there
face.
are solves. Yeah, I have a tiny face apparently, or I'm not using enough. Right? They all say that men don't use enough. Moisturizer? Maybe I just don't use enough moisturizer. I don't know, but it's like those kinds of little things. It's really hard to solve for, because like it became that I had like 4 bottles of this stuff here because I was consuming it at half the rate, and I'm too busy to cancel it. So I finally just canceled it.
Yeah, I mean it is interesting when you think about, we'll call it different. I think like food and beverage, I know is the fastest growing segment of Shopify Plus, and
Hmm.
health and nutrition, which I believe supplements would fall within. I've always been a little bit confused of when is something considered health and wellness or health and nutrition versus a food and beverage, because oftentimes
It's
like
blended a little bit,
it's
many
blended.
times.
But they're like with pills, at least it's easy to sort of ration out. All right, this is a 60-day supply. You take one pill a day. All right, they need more. That's easier to monitor than something where it's coffee, for example, where I don't know exactly how I eyeball. I might have coffee every day, and even if I drink it consistently, the amount that I use versus you might be different. And sometimes I might be making it for everyone in my family. Sometimes it might just be for me. And so, for replenishable products like that, I wonder what the ideal experience is, and to what extent is the subscription worth is it to what extent is it like to what extent is it worth offering a subscription even though it's not right for a lot of people, but they'll do it because that's the best way to like relatively consistently get the product, versus providing other ways to facilitate replenishment. I don't know, and I'm not necessarily trying to lead us anywhere in particular, but I am thinking about,
No,
I
it's
think,
an interesting problem to solve. I was literally having a conversation about this with a client about like how do we know the consumption rate if it's not standardized the way it is for say a supplement?
yeah,
It could just be asking, but like there isn't a genius flow that I've seen where like someone asks me how fast I consume it and then adjust the subscription. It could be done, right? You could literally do this manually with CS teams where you basically have a templated question, hey, how fast do you consume XYZ? And then based on that, they customize the subscription. The problem is if the consumption rate changes, you're back to square one, right? If,
right,
for example, you're making coffee for your family, that's over in that case.
right,
I talked to a brand a while back, and they're not secret or anything. Bottomless coffee.
yeah,
Essentially, they put a scale under the coffee bag, and
yeah,
it's networked, and that's the reorder is triggered by the weight of the product. So
yeah,
that's an interesting use case where it's solving for it based on consumption. And to some extent, I think they do a lot of curation as well on the product, like which coffee you get that
yeah,
time. But you never run out through the scale mechanism, which I think I've seen a few people go at like the scale approach. I think
yeah,
even Amazon played with it, if I'm not mistaken. I do remember they played with something called, I've been like through a lot of their test products. They had something called the Dash scanner, which was like you scan a barcode and then it shows up at your house 2 days later.
hmm,
I had that, never really ended up using it more than once just as the gimmick. It was not practical. But then they came out with this thing called Dash Buttons, which was interesting. It was like
yeah,
little Bluetooth things. You
yeah,
click them, you put them next to wherever you're consuming the product. Let's say detergent was a good example. Put it there. When you run out, you click a button, it shows up at your house 2 days later. So that was an interesting
yeah,
product. I thought it was actually a pretty good use case, but they canceled the initiative. I know they had some issues in the EU about like because they didn't display the price and they were transacting with people's credit cards. The EU didn't like that.
hmm,
But I don't know why they would have canceled it in the US, but they did, and this was a few years ago. And then a newer brand, Branch, they're basically tech enablement using NFC and QR codes to allow for opting into products, but I'm guessing you could use it also for replenishment. I don't know. I think they market it that way too. Essentially, you put a QR code or like an NFC tag in the package and you tap your phone to it to reorder again. Problem is, I don't think it's like completely touch free the way a dash button is, but that's like the newest tech I've seen. It's a pretty cool use case, and that's consumption based. But the problem is, it becomes this balancing act of I didn't have to take any action, to I had to take some action, to I had to take a lot of action to consume a product consistently. And it's like the
yeah,
spectrum we're solving for, but I think it's probably highly product dependent the way you think about it.
yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, I think, yeah, and I wonder to what extent does it matter, right? Like, how important is it to quote unquote solve this problem? Is this an example of a nice to have versus a need to have? I think the one reason, and I had spoken to Daniel Toft. I don't know if you know Daniel. I spoke to him a few days ago. And,
Not personally, no.
one of the interesting things, so he works with like a bunch of really cool brands, including like I think Haas and the Trade Coffee guys.
Very cool.
One of the things he said was that the number one reason, I mean, this is a stat that I think is pretty well known. The number one reason that people churn is too much product. But what was interesting was he was talking about what's that experience of the customer the first time they churn. And he gave this example of you buy a subscription to, let's call it body wash.
Sure.
And the very first time that you need body wash, but you don't have body wash, you are going to go to the local Walgreens, buy body wash, and you're going to cancel your subscription, right? It's one of those things where the margin for, he called it the margin for error, is very, very narrow around subscriptions, because whether you have too much or too little, as soon as it kind of the experience falls within that margin of you have too much or you don't have it at the exact time that you need it, you oftentimes will churn the customer, and at that point it's very difficult to get them back. So that is an example where we'll call it solving this problem matters. I guess the question is, like most things, are there better ways? Are there bigger problems to solve, right? Whether it's cash flow or enabling bulk, like are there, in the hierarchy of problems to solve for a brand or even a subscription brand, where does that fall? And
I think it's pretty high.
Okay.
Like churn is going to be driven by too much or too little complaints very often. Like it's like sometimes it's not churn of customers, just churn of subscription, which means they're just no longer subscribed and then they're ordering as needed. The problem is that's usually a lower lifetime value paradigm than if they were subscribed, if they're ordering as needed. So you're better off having them subscribed. And if you can reduce the churn that comes out of it, churn is much more important now than it's ever been in terms of it's cheaper to keep a customer than to acquire a new one. I mean, everyone said this, but It's becoming more expensive to acquire new ones. And so churn is a bigger problem to be solved. Now, the question is, how often is churn driven by too much product consumption, right? I think it's pretty easy to land like a supplement subscription. You consume it in 30 days, you keep on shipping every 30 days, you're kind of good. But what happens with other products that are not consumed in like that linear path? That's where any product like that, if you can solve churn by 2-3%, that's like serious. That's a big difference, at least from what I've seen with my clients and people I talk to. But it also might be that it's not a painful problem until it's too late. So like people might not like buy into that problem and trying to solve it until it's too late in the business to be solving it.
Well, and I think that's a very interesting point, and it's something that I've been thinking about a lot and writing about to myself in my journal, my D2C journal, which is at what point, like basically what are the different inflection points for a subscription brand where different problems become a problem. So like, for example, I think that subscription management, initially when a brand starts, it might be annoying if if the experience isn't completely self-serve, but you have customer support or customer success reps who are able to more or less handle most of the day-to-day stuff that might come up. Part of it depends on the price point of your product, like how much time does it take for someone to close a ticket? What's the average price value of an order? But I think there's clearly an inflection point where, and I don't know if it's at 10,000 subscribers, 100,000 subscribers. Well, I can say fairly definitively it's before 100,000 subscribers. So maybe, but I don't know where. Maybe it's 10,000 or 5,000. Because I've spoken to brands at 10,000 who are like, it's a huge problem for them, where the customer experience and the ability to manage the subscription is a huge issue for the entire business. It affects morale. It affects churn. In some cases, depending on the reason that the person is having the support issue, it can lead to people blaming the brand for a poor customer experience. And oftentimes, even with, we'll call it subscription products, there aren't necessarily that many different pieces that you as a brand are able to control the experience. You're able to personalize and customize, we'll call it like visual aspects. You're able to personalize some messaging. I mean, I'm trying to take a mental inventory of like what are the different ways I've seen subscription brands without building every single part of it themselves. What have they been able to incorporate that is truly a unique experience? And it's largely like pre-cancellation surveys where it's like the choose your own adventure, and it'll, based off your answers, they'll either try to like downsell you to a smaller amount of product. They'll suggest that they'll like offer to pause your plan for a month. They'll give you a $5 discount, whatever.
Right. Like the Dollar Shave Club flow. At least that's what like the stereotypical template for that has always been in my world.
Oh, really? Yeah. But beyond that, I feel like most experiences, and now that we have SMS in the mix, you're starting to see more around just like I ordered Trade Coffee the other week to test the experience because I heard they have a really good subscription experience. I think they've built their own platform. I know for a fact they're not on like a Shopify or something. And I got a text message upon delivery of the product. I think PostScript probably supports that at this point for Shopify stores. I actually don't know.
They don't, but you just integrate with some other Shopify apps to make it happen. But you can do that through PostScript eventually, yeah.
Right. Okay. So you can still send a text message through PostScript, but using another app that
to
will
trigger that the
delivery
happen.
Yeah. Got it. Maybe through like the fulfillment product. Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like even thinking through, to what extent can you use separate tools to provide a truly unique or good customer experience? And again, I think we could probably talk about this for hours, so I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes because I think there's other topics. We talked about like stopping this episode and then doing another one.
We've been going for a while though.
Yeah, we have been. Well, we'll cut out the
fire alarm
where your apartment caught on fire. Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, so let's put a cap on talking about the consumption stuff. I don't know if there's a question you want to leave our active audience with, or even like a feedback that you would ask for them, or even if you have a suggestion for folks around thinking about how to approach.
There's like a lot to think about there. I think one thing that comes to mind, and I didn't come up with this metaphor, but someone on Twitter, which I wish I remembered who it was, but like I just remember the tweet, not the author, unfortunately, was calling out that brands have become very transactional, especially during the pandemic when people haven't been seeing other people as often. So it's all about like order confirmation emails and transactional communication that sounds transactional, right? The fact that it's transactional is not the problem. That it sounds transactional does, right? It sounds like I'm calling into AT&T or Verizon and receiving the customer support I expect to receive when I call those kinds of companies. And you're getting that exact same thing via email and SMS communication, and from many brands right now. And what would you do if you're a fashion brand, or no, like a beauty brand, and Kim Kardashian walked in the door, right? Let's say your virtual store, she walked in. What's rolling out the red carpet like? And why not do that for every single customer? Because if you do it right, you can automate it and it costs you nothing. But in that level of attention to detail to every little part of the experience to make sure that a VIP gets the best possible experience. And with subscription, I think that's really important because that both sets you up for success in terms of churn down the line when you're setting them up for a subscription from the first place. And then also, what do the touch points look like when they're reaching out while they're on a subscription? It's probably just as important. Going back to churn is a key driver, and it's cheaper to keep the customer than to get a new one. how do we make sure they feel like they're at the Four Seasons versus the Motel 6, right? Like we can do this all automatically with smart communication. It's not like we have to build crazy stuff to do this, but you would see that very few brands actually bother to go to that level of thought to like automate all this. Like sure, they have great CS teams, but they're not creating it so that you have this evergreen experience that feels VIP. So that's, I guess, my challenge to the audience is like, what's the one or two things you can do today? Little hacks, hook up like a shipping notification SMS, even like little things to make people feel like they're getting the VIP experience that people are starting to expect from most D2C brands, because it's that or Amazon. And Amazon has a standard experience to expect. D2C has to be like the VIP experience in many cases.
Got it. Wise words.
I
And
don't know about
okay, if
wise,
people
but
want to
yeah.
learn more about you, fine. Words.
Yes, words.
English words.
I stole them from
If
someone else. I just said them longer.
well, yeah, I was trying to think of a pun. I couldn't. Is like instead of plagiarizing, it's like tweeting without attribution. Doesn't matter. Twattribution. I don't know. How can people connect with you if they want to get in touch or learn more about what you do, or send you roses?
Send me roses. That would be hard. Hit me up on Twitter. B and then my last name, Kochavy. So B Kochavy. My website's pretty easy to find. It's ben.bio. I landed that domain a while back, and that kind of points you to everything else.
Cool. Awesome.
But yeah,
Ben, this was awesome, and I know that we have a lot more to talk about either in the near future or, yeah. So
definitely.
a lot
No,
of fun,
this has
man.
been great. Really appreciate it.
Awesome.
The audience should feel free to reach out for anything. I'm always down to chat D2C,
Awesome.
business, etc.
Awesome.